And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. On tonight's episode, I'm going to be looking at the first of three different photo shoots I've done with textile designer Morag Macpherson. I'm also going to be discussing 4 different ways you can convert your images to black and white and the advantages and disadvantages of each. And then, of course, I'll be doing the critique feedback section with a couple of photos that have been submitted. So, first thing I wanted to talk about, actually before that, if you find this interesting and of use, then do also consider the idea of donating. You'll see just down there, Facebook, under where it says Facebook Live, donations to paypal.me/Kim Ayres. Not compulsory, but always appreciated. And if you're watching this recorded or repeated on YouTube, then do subscribe and click the little bell notification so that you know when future episodes are available as well. So the first thing I wanted to talk about this evening is a photo shoot I did for Morag Macpherson. Now Morag's a wonderful textile designer based out of Kirkcudbright in southwest Scotland. And so we decided to do a shoot. Now she creates designs, patterns, and then puts them into various things. Could be scarves or cushions, but she also has this thing about doing kimonos. Now, based on traditional Japanese patterns, but using her designs. And so she created these kimonos. They were quite amazing things, and wanted to do some shoots, do a shoot particularly with the kimonos. We were sort of playing around with different ideas. Sometimes with clients, trying to get an idea that is usable is one of those things that can take a bit of time, and you go through various processes narrowing things down. With Morag, part of the problem was almost too many ideas. Morag's mind works fast and furious, and there was lots of ideas flying about. Anyway, one of the things that cropped up was she was part of a collective at a place called the Yellow Door in Dumfries. The Yellow Door is an artist gallery. There's a collective of artists who run it. It's an old building that's being done up, and the ground floor, the front room, and then there's a little back room. And the little back room had been done out, kind of a bit like a boudoir, really, quite sumptuous and with rich cloth. And Morag quite liked the idea of doing a shoot in this space. And she had a friend, Jessica, who was coming down from Glasgow, who she thought would be ideal for modelling the kimonos. She was also talking about this lovely young woman she'd been seeing on the bus. Didn't know who she was, but as she decided describing her, I suddenly thought, I'm going to say, I know her. She was a Lamnesh. She was the daughter of friends of mine. So phone calls were made, emails were done, and eventually we managed to arrange a time when we could get access to the Yellow Door. So what I'll do is just show you the space. So if I double click on that and then flip over here. Hopefully you should now see that. A little bit dark. This is an unedited, quick photo grabbed. But what you should be able to notice here is that essentially what we've got is this room. We've got plaster peeling off in the back. There's this wonderful sort of bed here with drapes coming down. And the bed itself was scattered with a little bit of lingerie, and some of these cushions here were also taken from Morag's designs. So this was the space that we decided to use. And then once the girls had got a bit of makeup and hair going the way they wanted, and the kimonos put on, this was kind of a test shot, sort of get a sense of the space and what we could be doing. Now, for me, at the time, this was probably ended up being one of the most colourful photo shoots I've ever done. the importance for me was the fact that when I started doing photography on any kind of sort of professional level, I was very much a black and white guy. I was doing black and white portraits. Black and white gave me a lot to sort of play around with, and I could play around with textures. But if I'm truly honest, colour scared me a bit. I didn't really feel I understood colour in the same way. And so by removing colour from the equation, it gave me an arena to play in without overstretching myself or confusing myself too much. And it wasn't until I really felt I'd kind of got a much better grasp of how to use black and white did I dare to start slowly sort of tiptoeing into the world of colour photos. Now, I had started taking colour photos at this point, but Morag's kimonos, as you can sort of see here, were really rich and colourful, and then the setting we were in was quite rich and colourful too. So this was time to go to town on colour, and what I did was I then set up a 3-light system, and sort of roughly, well, because sort of about here, just you can see the edge of a light, an umbrella here, so that's where the key light was coming in. But then what I also did was I had a flash over on the right, and I put a red coloured gel across it, and then over on the left I put a blue coloured gel onto the flash there. Now this is an unedited photo, so you're only getting hints of the colour. If I move on to one of the edited photos, you'll get a much better sense. Okay, that's not clicking forward, so let's just go here. And now you should have a much better sense of, so edited up, you can now start to see the way the red is coming from the right hand side as you see it, and you can see it hitting the top of the drapes here. The blue is filling a space here, then you've got the blue catching the top of Jessica's hair here and the corner of her shoulder there. Over behind Alamnesh, the red is catching the side of her face and lighting up the kind of cushions. So you've got reds and blues kind of coming in, catching highlights, catching edges, and it really becomes this really rich, colourful overload almost, but it's sumptuous, and that's really what we were trying to capture with this. Here's another one from the shot. For those who've watched a couple of previous episodes where I was talking about the use of diagonals and leading lines, you can see from the angle of Jessica's leg here, and you've got this lovely kind of diagonal running up Lamnish's shoulder. Becomes even more so here. What we've got is a very triangular shape with Lamnish's leg coming up here, her arm coming up here, kind of center aligned, and then the lines of that triangle echoed by the drapes up in the corners of it as well. So again, it's rich, colourful, playing around. I mean, it's sort of slightly more classical composition that, and this one where we've got the both of them together. Now, actually, one of the things I will just point out here as well is if you look at this original unedited photo, you'll notice that the covering on the mattress is a sort of pink colour, whereas in the edited version it's much bluer, a sort of bluish, slight purplish tint to it. And that was when I came to editing it, actually, that pink just didn't sit right. I mean, considering there's so many colours, in a way, the colours are... There's still a sort of a set of colours. There's particular kinds of blues, there's particular kinds of yellows, there's particular kinds of reds. And that pink just didn't sit right there. So I recoloured that bit. And it took a little while. I sort of set out the area and then sort of I went through varying colours to see what would work. You know, I mean, obviously green wasn't going to work because there isn't really much in the way of green in this, and different shades. And eventually I sort of settled on this. And then that way what happened is it no longer drew the eye. That was really the point of it, is a lot of other colours, your eye instantly got drawn to the mattress. And that's no good because the photo shoot isn't about the mattress. The photo shoot is about the kimonos and the cushions behind, which also have Morag's designs on them. So this was really what the shoot was about, and certainly at the time, it was, like I say, the most colourful shoot I'd done, and I was really quite pleased with the way it had gone. Interestingly, we did a second shoot in the building, which was totally different. Upstairs, and it would be, the building was it'd be quite sort of decayed and was sort of falling apart. It was being done up bit by bit, but there was an attic which just hadn't been touched for decades, and the wood was rotting, and we had to be a bit careful where we stood, so in case there was problems with the floor, and it was very, very kind of grungy, really. And we decided we would do a second shoot up there, but have it looking more like a fashion shoot, where you have like a single flash shooting off at the models, and then you could have this kind of urban decay grunge kind of look, which would be a very different kind of feel for the kimonos. So the pictures, the promotional photos, as well as showing off, are giving a sense of, so in this case you get this, you know, evening wear, sensual kind of idea for it. But if we move upstairs, now you can see this grungy background, you know, the rotting wood with the mould and stuff on it, and now Jessica's got her hair down. We've deliberately gone for a kind of messy hair look and a grungy feel, really. And then here was one with a lamnesh as well. So now what you've got is urban attitude. So the idea that you could just as easily take these incredibly colourful, beautifully patterned kimonos and wear them out on the town as well if you wanted. So being able to get two entirely different shoots out of one building was a bit of fun as well. Felt like a bit of a bonus. So that's really what I wanted to talk about with that. I'm now going to sort of talk about black and white, but before we get to that, I should have said earlier that it's quite fun if you leave me some comments in Facebook. I'll take a quick look and see if I have any comments. Brian. Hi, Brian. Looking forward to another night. Okay, that's great. Well, yeah, thank you for joining me again. I will periodically drop in, look through the comments. So if anybody else wants to, if you've got any questions as I'm going, if you have any thoughts, ideas, inputs, or just want to say hi, leave me a little smiley face. These kind of things are always welcome. So the next thing I want to talk about is black and white, and it kind of feels like a bit of a leap in some ways, but I think why I wanted to talk about black and white when these pictures have been so colourful is because it is. There's a number of different ways you can convert an image to black and white, and like I say, I started in black and white, and whilst I then moved into colour, there are times when you still move back into black and white. For those that were watching the last week or the week before, and I was talking about that very kind of film noir photo. I had The Undefended Hour, which was originally designed to be a colour photo, but when I put it into black and white, it's transformed the whole feel of it. And sorry, it's 2 weeks ago. And so I've been talking about the fact that there was this photo, and this photo was designed very much to be a colour photo, where we've essentially got reds and yellows as the key theme. So Anne is wearing a deep red dress with deep red lipstick to match the blood that's on the back of the shirt, and then it's the red is appearing on the cigarette butts as well. So there was this whole kind of red and yellow theme. But then when I converted it to black and white, suddenly it became a kind of film noir, femme fatale, 1940s kind of feel to it. The mood of it changed quite considerably, and I fell in love with it. And from then on, I've only ever really tended to show this picture in black and white. So there are times that even though you can have something which is designed in colour, sometimes it works better in black and white. Black and white is often also a kind of go-to fix. Sometimes when you're looking at a photo and you think, not really sure quite whether this is working or not, you can drop it into black and white. Sometimes it lifts it, sometimes it doesn't. But because it can, it's nearly always worth taking a quick look at your photo to see if it will work in black and white as well, or how it changes in black and white. Now, if you're taking an image and you want to go to black and white, there's a number of different ways you can go about it. So what I'm going to do here is let's take a photo so we've got this tulip here. You might or might not want to convert it to black and white, but what I want to show you is how different styles or different ways of doing black and white, or different ways of converting to black and white, will have quite a profound impact on the way the image looks afterwards. Now, the most obvious way of doing it, the first thing you do is you desaturate. And most editing programs have a desaturation bar. So if I pull up over on the right here, I go down to hue saturation, and I can play around with this saturation bar. And if I push it up, I oversaturate, and if I drag it down, I desaturate. I remove the colour from it. And so now you've got a straightforward black and white, except for the fact that it's okay, but it maybe feels a little bit dull. There's not a lot of contrast to it. So sometimes when you do a black and white, just a straightforward desaturation doesn't really work. Sometimes you might feel that really what you want to do now is boost the contrast a bit. So you might say grab the curves a bit and create a little bit more of a, maybe sort of a little bit more contrast here, or even create that S-bend in the curves where you make the lights lighter and the darks darker. That's overcooked it. But yeah, so it's then still fairly unsatisfactory. So another way of converting to black and white, part 2 here, is a gradient map. Now, a gradient map, if you look over in the left corner here, you'll see I've got a black square and a white square. So this is essentially the front colour. If I've got a paintbrush, that's currently a black. If I paint over here, you see that's black. Now I can change this to any colour I want. I could change it to red. And then the other one is a background colour. So if I decided to remove something, then it would become white. Or I can quickly swap those round and I can have white over the top. Now what a gradient map does, which is it can move, there's a number of different things you can do here, but I'll just select that for the moment, is it will create a gradient. So the darkest part will be one colour and the lightest part will be the other. So with the red and blue, so if I go to click here, yeah, that's right, go to gradient map, we can now see that the darkest part of the pictures are now red, the lightest part of the pictures are white. If I reverse that, now the darkest part of the pictures are white, and the lightest part are red. So we actually, in this case, we end up with quite a negative, like a red negative. And we can change that with any kind of colour we want. Now, if instead of having it as red, I create that as black, then the gradient map becomes black to white, which then gives us a black and white photo. Now, I probably got rid of the hue saturation one a bit too quickly, so let's just go back to that and desaturate. So that's a desaturated and that's a gradient map. And can you see the difference there? That basically the gradient map is creating more of an extreme with the light and dark. It's going to it is making the darkest parts black and it is making the lightest parts white. Whereas this hue saturation isn't necessarily, it's kind of keeping it more mid-range. So sometimes you want to convert using a gradient map because it will give you more to play with, or sort of more contrast. I'll show you this with another photo as well. Let's go back to, so this one I did, it was a photo I used in week 2, which I think really will show you. Now this was one I was using to talk about the notion of rule of thirds. Just to, this is Berwick Lighthouse on the end of the breakwater, and it's a very soft pastel picture. Now the way we were playing with it before is the fact that this is dead center, and what we were then doing was playing around with how we could possibly crop this. So actually I will think, no, actually for this I want to keep more of the sky, I think, and we'll do something like this, I think. And zoom in a little bit more. Now, if we go to desaturate on this, because there's not a lot of colour, there's not a lot of contrast to begin with, it really does feel pretty flat. So let's try the gradient map with that. And actually in this case, let's see, what's it? That's the hue saturation, that's the gradient map. It's a little bit more, there's not huge amounts going on. And this is where, again, what you really might want to do is take something like the curves and just really start creating more contrast, just to give it a little bit more definition. But it's a lot of it is about how you which photo you're choosing and whether it's worth converting to black and white. The way this one is working is because the contrast is not so much between light and dark. The contrast is between pink and blue. So that's two different ways. So way number 3 is the channels. Now this is where I think we end up with the most interesting conversion kind now, because basically what happens is light, as it's done in photography, is done through a red channel, a blue channel and a green channel. It's different from print. Print is CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow and black. But light is red, green and blue, and when you mix them all together you get white. When you take them away you end up with black. So you end up, so the different channels have different qualities to them, and sometimes you can get the same thing. You can put a filter across your lens. You'll see people will put particular filters which will filter out certain light waves, so some aspects don't hit the sensor as much. Now really what I need to show you here is, if I go to the channels, which I've got up here, and if I go to the red channel, what happens is anything that's red now becomes much whiter, and your kind of opposite end, sort of blue and green, sort of gets a little bit darker. Now if I go to the green channel, now the reds, the greens are a bit lighter and the reds are a bit darker, and in the blue even more so. The blues now become lighter. So in a purple, which is what this tulip is, if you just look at that first of all, that's on the blue channel, that's on the green channel, that's on the red channel. So they're quite different, and the red and the blue channel are slightly more similar, though still subtly different, because of course we've got the purple. The green is really quite different. But also notice the yellow and red blurred tulip in the background. Here the yellow light is coming through very similar on the red one, so they're both getting lit. On this one, now the red has become much darker and is contrasting with the yellow. And with this one, the blue, both the red and the yellow have become darker. So there's a very different feel to each of these, as opposed to your desaturation or your gradient map. Now, there's nothing to stop you actually combining some of these as well. So if we take the blue, and I'll copy that and paste that there, but then I create a gradient map with it as 2, the gradient map will still do a black and white where it's darkening the darks and lightening the light, creating a wider spectrum or a more extreme spectrum of tonal gradient. So that's really another way of doing it. Now, to go back and play then, because what I want to show you, what happens if we do this with one of those kimono shots. So if let's open this one here. Now, what's good about this is we've got blue on the side of Alamnish's face here, but we've also got red over here. We've got red catching the side of Jessica's face, but we've got blue on her hair. You can see the blue patch light splattered on the wall here, and then you can see red bits catching here. Now, if I go, let's say we go to the saturation and I desaturate, again it's kind of, well, we've lost the colour, and I think it's also become flatter. If I do the gradient map, okay, that gives us more of a kind of contrast, but then I'm losing a bit of Alamnish's face there as well. But what I really want to show you is just how different these channels are. If I go to the red channel, so now everything that's red is being lit up much brighter. So skin tones become brighter. All the red and the yellows and everything that's coming from the right hand side of the picture is being lit up quite bright. But the blue corner over here is lost, or it's just become dark rather. Now if I go to the green channel, what an absolute contrast. And then if I go to the blue channel, different feel again. So in the blue channel, what was in the red channel, the blue had sort of disappeared into darkness. Now the blue is really light, and that bit's being lit up. In the green channel, it's sort of a midway point. Again, in the blue, the red part has become darker. So each of these has got quite a different feel to it. It's profound. I mean, if you look at Jessica's face there, in the blue channel is just looking very flat no matter where the light is coming from. In the green channel, now the red light that was hitting her face has now created much more of a strong shadow because the red is coming across darker. Here, the red is lighter, and it's so light it's lighting up with the main light that's coming in. Similarly, there's not as much contrast in Alamnish's face, whereas here the blue light is getting, well, here the blue light is much, much lighter. The red light on the side of her face, because the red has become darker, is now lost in the shadow as well. So it's always worth exploring the channels to see what you might get. I mean, another one, if I take this one as well, and again, red channel, now it looks like she's just being lit up completely. Green channel, quite different. Blue channel, completely different. Skin tones, very pale, very dark. Green, midway, but look at the lipstick. The lipstick on the red channel, because she's wearing red lipstick, has become very pale. On the green channel, it's opposite, it's opposed out. So now the lips look really dark compared to a lighter face. And then in the blue channel, the lips and the skin tones have become very similar again. So that's really what I wanted to show you with that. So with your black and white conversion, if you're just going desaturate, you're missing a huge amount of tricks. There's these different ways of doing it. Now, the final way that I want to, there is another fourth way, and a lot depends on your editing program. I am using Photoshop. I think there are other ones that might have this as well. But some have a specific, actually no, just before I get to that, I do want to show you what happens with Berwick Lighthouse is an interesting one here with the channels. Because if I do the red channel, you see that pink, light yellowish red, that bit becomes brighter. If I do the green channel, it's become very dull. And if I do the blue channel here, we've lost completely the lightness of this patch here, which shows up in the red, has become darker. And it's become dark to the point whereby it now matches up, it just with the kind of blue of the sky there. So interesting with that conversion, it's incredibly dull. There's virtually no texture in it at all. All you've got is the line of the breakwater and a little bit of the lighthouse. So where was I? Yes, I wanted to talk next about the notion of a fourth kind of black and white conversion. So this one that was playing around with, I think, was the blue channel. That was using gradient map, and that was using hue saturation. Now, over here, down here, I have a thing called a black and white filter. And what it does, I've got this little bit down here, and we've got reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas. Now, as an initial, what it's done is very similar to the just straightforward hue saturation. It's just kind of dropped the colours down, so there's virtually no difference between. It's very subtle, if there is. But what I can now do is I can take the reds that were in there and I can make them lighter or I can make them darker. So if you look then at that tulip in the background, the red at the base, I can lighten it out or I can darken it down. Now I can go through and do the same thing. The yellows, I can boost the yellows or I can darken the yellows. I can take the greens, I can lighten the greens and I can darken the greens. The cyans, just a little bit up there over on the left of the picture. The blues, gain a kind of mid-light there, and then the magenta, that's essentially the closest we've got to the purple. So you can see the actual front tulip is just darkening down or lightening out. And so what we can do with this, we might want to darken the red in the background, we might want to lighten the greens, we might want to boost the yellows, take that cyan down a bit, take that blue up a little bit, and then take that magenta down or boost that magenta up. So you can see that there's a whole, you can take each of these sliders and start playing around with them, and each of them will give you a different level. So a bit like the channels, except for the fact you can now kind of separate them out and you've got a couple of extra options as well. So you can boost one bit and pull down another. So that really kind of gives you a lot to play with. I mean, another place where this becomes really obvious is if you've got a sunset picture. So here we have glorious sunset over Loch Ken, and lovely reflections in here. Now, again, just to show you the channels, the red channel, you know, where it's red here becomes whited out, where it's blue becomes very black. The green channel is probably a bit more like what you would expect with a desaturation, and the blue channel, now all this bright red bit has become very, very dark to black, and it just, to be honest, it looks a bit weird. So again with this, now not you would normally convert a sunset to black and white, but if you are particularly wanting to play around with the textures of it, so gradient map, well fine, it does give you a few layers to play with, but if you go to that black and white slider, you can make the reds lighter, maybe, if you want to do that, or boost the yellows, or maybe take the yellows down a bit. There's almost nothing in the greens. Cyan now is sort of mucking around with the top part of the sky. The blue also up there, they overlap very much, and the magenta is giving us in the middle where those purples were. So you can sit and play to your heart's content and make a complete mess of a picture if you want. Or maybe you're going to create something which is truly astounding, which would be lovely. So that's really what I wanted to talk about with the notion of black and white. So you can desaturate just by taking your saturation slider and sliding it down. You can use gradient map, where you choose one colour and another colour. You take black for the blacks and white for the whites, and it will sort out the grades in between. You can use the red, green and blue channels, and depending on the colours that you've got within your picture, each will create quite a different feel to it. And then you can use the black and white mixer, which allows you to move the individual colours about. So, hope that gives you some ideas to play with, that black and white isn't just a case of hitting the desaturate button. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, and you can get really creative and have a lot of fun with black and white conversions if you've got the right picture for it. Obviously a sunset isn't particularly the right picture for it, and with something like the kimonos pictures, you know, these were designed to be in colour. But what they do here is demonstrate quite nicely just how different the systems work. So I'll just flip back now to Facebook, see if we have any more comments. Oh, a couple more. VG, the attic photos are awesome. Oh, thank you. That was a lot of fun. Mandy, hi Kim, hi Mandy. Brian, fantastic colours. Thank you. Stuart, sorry can't do this tonight as driving. Well, I hope you weren't texting that in while you're driving, Stuart. Have to assume you're not. Fiona is Jessica's mum. Happy memories of the Yellow Door experience. Thank you, Kim. Well, thank you, Fiona, and thank Jessica for us. And Pat, hi Kim, found you at last. Really glad you found me, Pat. That's lovely. Oh, well, that's nice. That's always lovely to get a few comments going on in the chat room. So that's brilliant. Now at this point, we're going to start on the critique. I'm going to look at a couple of photos that have been sent in. As I mentioned earlier, if you find this useful, if you think it's inspiring you for ideas, then PayPal donation is always welcome, paypal.me/Kim Ayres. The critique section is here for you to, if you get sort of stuck, you're kind of wanting to know how to move your photography up to, you know, you've got a picture, you don't really know quite where it's going or what else you could have done with it. It's easy enough to sort of see me applying these to other people on a kind of sort of, oh, well, there's a photo, that's how you convert it to black and white. But then when sometimes you get to your own photo, you go, well, yeah, but how does that apply to me and my photo in this instance? And sometimes you get a bit stuck. So at that point, join the group, if you haven't already, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres on Facebook. Just type that straight into Facebook and you'll find it. Join the group, and then you can post images, stick in an image, tell me where it is you feel you've got a bit stuck, and then I'll include it in the following week's critique section live, and you can follow along. And actually, as a little bit of fun, anybody at home wants to sort of play along, you know, again, leave comments in the Facebook group. Oh, Ruth, you've joined us too. Brilliant. Hi, Ruth. Saying enjoying this. I'm glad you are. So yeah, take your photos, stick them in. Tell me what you're looking for, and yeah, and while I'm doing this, if any of you have any ideas, or you're not sure what it is I'm talking about, or you suddenly get a massive explosion of inspiration and go, hey, Kim, you could do this. Again, leave a comment in Facebook, and I'll periodically check in. So what I want to talk about next then. So yes, we're on to the critique section. Now, let's flick back over here, just clear these ones. Now, I've had two people send in this week. Graham. I'll start with Graham and VG. I'll start with Graham. The VG's is sort of a little bit more to it, to her answer, I think. Now, basically, Graham sent me a couple of photos just saying, looking for general improvement in composition. So the first one he sent in, this beautiful photo of his wife and grandson. Beautiful smiley face. I've got a grandson myself who looks probably about the same kind of age. Mine will be 3 next month. Graham, I'm guessing yours is probably also kind of 2.5, maybe pushing 3 there as well, but you can let me know later. It's a kind of, you know, lovely picture taken down on a beach. Is there a lot to do with it? I mean, it's a fun snapshot. It's all about the smiley face. I'm not totally sure that there's vast amounts you can do to it. It's not a competition winner. It's not something you enter into the lens culture or the or whatever kind of, you know, fancy portrait awards. This is the kind of photo which is the family photo. The only thing I would really say with this, where I think it would mostly benefit, is the notion of the crop. So if at the moment your grandson here is very central, I think if we sort of grab this and we pull this in to something like here, and so roughly playing around with that notion of the rule of thirds, that he's slightly off centre rather than in the middle, and that one of his eyes is kind of close to that corner part, that one of the 4 corners of the central square in a rule of thirds. And I think you find that, generally speaking, immediately that just becomes a slightly nicer composition. And then the other thing is, we've got it quite bright round the back. There's this chunk of Jane's blouse or top here, which isn't really doing much for the composition. So I think if we shaded that in, if we essentially vignetted it a bit, so if I'll just go up to camera raw is the quickest way of doing this. Grab the vignette and pull it in. And immediately you can see all it does is it stops the attention being pulled out to the edges, and it just draws your attention a little bit more into the middle. If you wanted, you could lighten up his face a bit, a little bit of dodge and burn, pull a little bit more attention into here, and you know, you're catching that. But at this point, I think it's really a bit of crop, a bit of vignette, and it just tidies it up, you know. Yeah, it's just got a kind of nice, it just sort of sits slightly more comfortably like that, I think. Not sure whether anybody else has any comments or thoughts about that, but I don't know that you're going to go much further with that. Of course, well, I suppose let's try black and white. Well, you know, something always a bit timeless about black and white photos. So, you know, maybe you can play around with the black and white. In which case, let's do a quick thing on the channels. Red channel, whoa, all the red's brightening out. Green, that's a little bit more like the kind of blue. Blue's doing funny things to the texture of the skin. Not quite so keen on the blue. So maybe not one of those, but maybe if we just go back to a straightforward gradient map, kind of gives you something. Yeah. Okay, and now your second photo that you sent me, I think was just you being a bit mischievous, to be honest. So what we've got here is the general story. You've got a guy in wetsuit with board, and he seems to be eyeing up the girl in the foreground. Now, given the fact that I reckon this guy, I think, is the same one that you sent me a picture a few weeks ago of him holding the baby, which I think is the same kid that we've just seen, then the idea that he might be eyeing up some pretty girl walking along the beach would get him into trouble. Except for the fact that I think actually, did you say that this was his sister? Doesn't really matter. The point is that what we're just having a slightly playful idea that a guy is distracted by a pretty girl walking along the beach. In terms of, I mean, it's again a little bit of a playful photo. It's playful for you. It's not really. You've not got both blokes looking at her. You've not. He could be looking past her. It's more of a hint of an idea rather than necessarily brilliantly executed, and really grabs you. And if you were going to sort of really want a photo like that, everything would have to be arranged slightly differently. In terms of composition, again, partly one of the problems we've got here is she is smack bang in the middle. All the action is sort of taking place over here. The girl over here is drawing the eye away and is actually ending up as a bit of a distraction rather than just as a background element. In terms of composition, I think there's a couple of different ways. Well, the thing is, it's too late to go back and change it. If you were really wanting to get in and play around with it, what I would probably do is something like, the first thing I would do is, sorry, cancel that. So I would want to have this, I'll tell you what, let's take this out here. And what I'm going to do, and I'll come out and crop it a bit more in a moment, because I want more picture to the left of it. Now I'm going to use content aware fill, which is a lovely little thing in Photoshop. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at the bits over here and it's going to fill in the space in the blank. So you can see now it's filled in. But we had this partial problem, or we had this problem of the fact that the surfer over here isn't completely there, and it's got no clue as to what it's supposed to be doing for that. So that bit's not been converted too well. So what I would then do is, well, we may as well just take the surfer out because he's not really adding anything to it. Then what I might do is take this person here, but actually I need to extend that down because there's a bit of reflection in the water. Copy her and move her maybe over here. So let's take a look, and then what I would need to do is let's just remove her. So again, I'll use the patch tool just to kind of take her out. I'll take out the reflection down there as well. And then if we pull this side in and we get her a little bit more rule of thirds as such, that starts to work a little bit better. In terms of other bits of composition, you've cut off her foot just at the bottom. I would have liked to have seen a bit more sand at the bottom here. But if I extend this down using content aware fill, it won't cope with her foot in the same way that it didn't cope with the surfer over on the left. There isn't an obvious thing to take care of it. So another option would be to just move it up a little bit and make it clear that you weren't trying to get her foot in. What I might also do is remove some of this sky. I don't know that that's really necessarily adding to it. Now, perhaps one last thing I might do, we've got her over there. In fact, actually, I would need to just very loosely use the mask and tidy up the edges of that. Obviously, you would take more time over this. I'm just trying to give you a rough idea. This woman here, I'd be tempted to swap these two round. So let's take her, copy, paste. Let's move her over here. Let's move her over here. And in fact, actually, what I need to do is remove the original here so that we've got space to place the new one. Similarly, with this one, I need to just create a quick mask and tidy up the edges just so that there's not an obvious line quite so much there. Now again, very rough, but what this allows you to do is maybe we just sort of move her into place over here, move her into place over here, so back here, and not quite, must have undone something there. Maybe her a little bit over there. And now you've got more of a sense of movement in terms of line. That's wrong one. Click there. Got a sort of a shape that comes up here and a shape that comes down here, and everything sort of, I think, becomes a sort of slightly more interesting composition where you've got a movement through the picture. The movement comes from her, through her, into him, catches round there, and then drags back again. So kind of your eye kind of moves around that way a bit into it. So compositionally, you would do that. But if you're just taking a quick snap and capturing a moment, you're probably not going to bother that much. But I just wanted to sort of show you how you can play. The whole idea of this critique section is to give you a leaping off point. I don't expect you to copy what I'm doing. I'm not saying that any of these are an absolute answer. The idea is just that hopefully for some of you, you'll go, I hadn't thought of that before. And so hopefully that just sort of acts as a little springboard. So that, I hope that's giving you some ideas to play with anyway, Graham. Now, I will do a quick, again, just a quick flick back. Pat says the blue is much better. I'm presuming that's from a channels. When we were talking about some of the channels, it was a few minutes ago. Okay, so let's pull that down, switch that back across there, and we'll turn to VG. Now, what VG has done is she has sent me a couple of different versions of a photo. It says, I wanted to try some low-key photos today. So I used the bronze statue we had at home to try out. Now, the low-key, just to talk a little bit about the difference between kind of low-key and high-key photos, just briefly, is low-key tend to be almost black dominated, dark dominated. The dominant feature is that it's a dark photo with highlights in it. High-key, by contrast, tends to be a very light photo, lots of whites or very, bright, and then with relatively few, is accented by the dark. So high key light, low key dark, and that's really what you need to remember. So VG had a statue. She wanted to try some low key style photos with it. I preferred to take photos outdoors in natural light, so this was a new experience. Well, that's great, VG. Get out there or get indoors, experiment. It's how we learn. Since I do not have any external flashes, I used 2 mobile flashlights in a certain angle and clicked these photos. They look good in my mobile Canon app and the DSLR screen, but as you mentioned the other day, it was a bit blurred when I checked on the computer screen. And yeah, that's one of those basic problems, that photos can look great. You've got your camera, and in the back of here, it looks great. You've got a couple of inches to play with, and that looks fine. But then as soon as you put it on a big computer screen, it doesn't work. You suddenly realise it's focused on the wrong bit, or it's slightly out of focus. So she was saying that she had that problem. Good news is I can try the subject again another day. It's not going anywhere. That's always a good point. Sending you a few of the photos, see which ones I want to use for critique. Are there any rules of thumb to take this kind of photograph, and for editing purposes, do's and don'ts? These are unedited. I use a black cloth as a base. Should have ironed them ahead. Well, that's always an old one, yeah. You're using a backdrop. How much is the backdrop going to be seen? How much should you have smoothed it? And how much are you going to be messing around in Photoshop afterwards to try and smooth out those awkward little creasy lines? Switched off all the lights except for the flashlights for the camera. Is this correct approach? And can we use the built-in flash? Okay, so there's quite a few questions here. I think so. At this point, what I'll do is let's go and drag one or two of these into Photoshop. So here's the statue, and here is another version, sort of lit slightly differently, and here's a close-up version of it. So in terms of that low key, it's mostly black with highlight edges. Now, I don't know how big this thing is VG. So that makes it sort of a little bit, because the size is going to make a difference, and depending on the lighting that you've got. Obviously, if this is kind of full human size 6-foot statue, you're going to light it in a different way than if it's a little kind of 3-inch mantelpiece statue. So now I'm assuming that these are going to be fairly small. It's very there is no reference point here, so I don't know completely. But at which point I suppose the idea of using flashlights or torches probably makes a lot more sense than using a great big softbox, something which is 4 foot big, which would absolutely swamp the whole thing with light. Now, obviously what you're trying to do here is pick out the edges. One of the big problems that you're up against here is the fact that because you've gone for a brass statuette, you do a metal basically, which is a highly reflective surface, means that the light hits it and can burn out easily. So you end up with hot spots. So like here, for example, where it is whited out completely. And, you know, or here we've got bits on the forehead where it's white. The light has become, even though the majority of it is dark, where the light has hit it, it's so bright that we've actually lost the detail of the metal within it. And this is a problem with using something with a highly reflective surface. Now, your general rule of thumb for doing low-key photography is low-key photography, certainly of this kind, where the black is going to be black. So you don't expose for the black, you expose for the brightest part. What you're not wanting is it to be overexposed on any point. So what you really do is you adjust your exposure so that this white spot doesn't happen. You've got it bright, but you could still just about make out the detail in it. Any brighter than that, and it's whited out, and you've lost the information in the picture. You can't bring it back again. So with low-key photography, expose for the brightest part and try and make sure that you've not overexposed the brightest part of the picture. High-key photography, you're working on a different idea with that, but specifically with low-key photography, you're doing that. So to answer your question in terms of your rule of thumb for exposure, then that's really the key one for that. You switched off all the lights except the torches. Is that a good idea? That kind of depends on, again, the shutter speed you're using, the exposure you're using. If it helps you to see what you're trying to take, then that's fine. If it means that you're then struggling to work out where the dials are on the camera because you can't see anything, then obviously it's working against you. So there's a little bit of kind of common sense playing around with that. It's a little bit like, I suppose, the debate for people whether they're using static lights or strobes or flashlights, things which give you a sudden burst of light. If you're using static lights, you can see before you go click exactly where the light is falling. If you're using flashes, off-camera flashes or strobes, then you don't know what it's going to look like until it's gone off and then you see the result in the camera. You sometimes have more flexibility with the flashes, but because you can't see it, you've got to learn to visualize ahead and make fast adjustments. So certainly when you're starting out, having lights there where you can see where the light is falling is probably quite a good idea. Now, the problem you've also got, though, is the torch is going to be quite an intense light in a short space. So you will end up with this problem of bright patches, which can maybe burn out particular areas. Now, if you've got torches, what I would suggest here, and it's something to play with, is to actually you want to diffuse, see if you can diffuse the light a little bit. And for that, maybe if you had a thin piece of cloth, thin piece of silk, very thin piece of cotton. Cotton might be too thick, but certainly silk could work. And try it. Try hanging, mock up something, have it wrapped around a piece of stick sitting across two vases, drape it, whatever you want to do. And so if you've got the silk lying there, your statue here, have your torch coming through it, and see how the light falls. Because what happens is, if you've got a cloth of some kind, as the light hits it, it diffuses it. Now it means that the light won't be quite as strong, but it will spread to be slightly bigger and softer, and the shadows will be a little bit softer, and that will create some really interesting effects. Now, if you've got colours in the silk, then that has the potential to now you can use it to your advantage if you want to put a colour sheen on it, or you try and find just a piece of white cloth so that it's not colour interfering with it. That's down to your personal taste and what you're aiming to do. You also ask whether you can use the built-in flash when taking these photos. I would absolutely avoid the built-in flash. Do not try. First of all, it will be very bright, and it will hit and it will bounce, and you will end up with all these hot spots of blown out highlights. The other thing is the light direction is then coming directly from where you are. Where your eyes are, where the camera is. So you're not going to get any interesting shadows. What's making this potentially interesting is the fact that we've got the light hitting the edges. This part's mostly lost in shadow, but we've got the edge, and because the light is hitting the edges, the details, the texture of the metal and the casting is what is really coming out. You can really see the necklace, and you can really see the folds in the dress and the bracelet. And if you had the light coming from the same direction as we were seeing it, you wouldn't have so much fun with the shadows. Now, in later episodes, I'm going to be talking much more about lighting and how you can use lighting, and I'll go into this in more detail. But yeah, the quick answer is no, don't use. The only time you ever use the flash on the camera is basically an absolute emergency, because you had to get something lit and there was no other option. Otherwise, you kind of avoid it. So I think that pretty much asks. And then you've asked, would it look better in black and white or colour? Well, again, we can just straightforward. Let's do a quick gradient map. Well, looks kind of interesting, but you see, part of this then depends on what you're chasing, because if you like, you say this is made from brass. If what you're trying to do is you like the brass, you're trying to get across the fact that it's a brass statue. The moment we do that, we've got no idea what colour it is. It could be tin, it could be pewter, could be silver, could be, any kind of metal. Basically, we have no idea. We need the colour in order to know that it's brass. So how important is the brass for you, as opposed to how important are the shadows? Because actually, if you take out the yellow, it then maybe does create a little bit more interesting. It emphasises the texture contrast rather than the colour contrast, which is what black and white is very often about. So that, again, is coming down to, so much is always, what are you chasing? What are you looking for? And then you convert it to black and white and see if it helps your story or if it detracts from your story. And a quick 2-minute play in your editing program will tell you whether it's working or not. So that's pretty much about it, I think. We're past the hour. I will just flick back here, just see if there's any final comments. I'll read you saying it's probably about 4 to 5 inches tall, so we're probably talking about that big. So for those who are curious, that's the size we were talking about for the brass statuette. That pretty much brings us to the end then. Once again, if you've enjoyed this, if you've found that you've got any use out of it, do consider leaving a donation to paypal.me/Kim Ayres. Thank you very much to everybody who commented in Facebook. I suppose if you're watching the recorded versions on YouTube, you can also leave comments in there if there's bits that now occur to you. I will pick up on those as well. Maybe we can even have a little debate in the comment sections as well. That's pretty much it, I think. Hopefully see you next week. Enjoy your week. See you next Tuesday at 7:30. Cheerio.